Good afternoon, everybody. So I think what's real about my talk today, there's two things I want to talk about, and I'm going to talk about context and hyperscale. So I'm going to start by giving you some really big numbers, and I want you to think about the context. So whatever number I give you has already been surpassed umpteen times over. And I think that's really important when we're talking about the scope of cybersecurity today and how things are evolving. They're evolving at a pace like we've never seen before. And again, if I talk about scope and if I talk about context, we have had three really kind of big major things that have happened in the last 2 years. So it wouldn't escape anyone's notice that we've been in the middle of a pandemic. We've also seen the biggest cyber attack in history, which is SolarWinds, and Microsoft genuinely believe it is the most sophisticated attack. And right now, we're seeing the war in Ukraine. Now, I'm going to talk about a little bit of this, but all of those three things together has created almost a perfect storm, if you like. So we have seen during this period a mass acceleration to the cloud. So a lot of companies were already on their journey to the cloud, but that's accelerated at a scale. And again, being Microsoft, I just want to talk about that scale for a little bit. So Microsoft is 47 years old, believe it or not. We have 220,000 people. 70,000 of those actually joined in the last 2 years. So if you think 47 years old, 70,000 in the last 2 years. We have 220 data centers, 17 of which of those were opened in Europe in the last 2 years as well. And we have 175,000 miles of fiber and subsea cables, which means we also have one of the biggest wide area networks in the world. And again, if I kind of think about when you think about the size of all of those things combined, every single day we collect, analyze, and process over 47 trillion telemetry signals. Now, I joined Microsoft 2.5 years ago, and at that time it was 6.5 trillion. So we have nearly gone 7 times, nearly 8 times the number of telemetry signals. So not only is that as a result of that mass acceleration to the cloud, but we've also seen many companies evolving their business model. So we're no longer, when we're talking about security, are we just talking about security from an IT perspective? We're talking about IoT and OT and all of these things combined. So we generate 360 petabytes of telemetry data every single day. So that makes up about 10% of the entire cloud. So just to kind of put that into perspective. So I'm going to give you some numbers, like I sort of said, and I want to talk about what happens every single minute of every single day. Now, I talked about the size and the scope of what's going on. The attack surface is actually growing just at the same rate. So what you'll see here, hopefully you can see some of these numbers, but 80,000 new hosts every single minute. Over 7,000 new IoT devices come online every minute. 150 domains, multiple mobile applications. Now, I want to kind of look at then, okay, so if we look at the volume of attacks, now there's a reason why we tell you not to use the same password. So there are 54,000 password attacks every minute. Now, if I kind of break that down, that's 900 every single second. Now, this is why, when we talk about why you need to make sure that you're protecting your credentials, why you're doing all of these things, and how easy it is for attackers and what they're really doing. And so we talk about IoT attacks as well. So when we talk about IoT devices, a lot of those really don't have very much security on them. A lot of people still utilize the same credentials they came with. Maybe it's admin. So again, all of these things just open up attacks. Now, you're probably thinking 7 phishing attacks a minute. That sounds quite low. What we mean by a phishing attack is that's one attack against a company. There could be thousands of mailboxes in that company. So I want you to think about 7 attacks against different companies, but thousands of mailboxes. Now, again, to put that into perspective, when we're talking about hyperscale, with the type of things that Microsoft are blocking through the Microsoft technology every minute. So over 60,000 email threats. So these are not just phishing emails, these are fake domains, these are fake attachments, all of those things combined. Over 60,000 identity attacks, and nearly 50,000 brute force attacks. So in essence, that's password sprays. And that's when I kind of started at the beginning, is how much of these attacks are happening. And this is the kind of the scope and scale, really, of where we are. Now, we look at the cost of cybercrime. So we are over $1 million a minute. Now, you might not be able to see that quite as well, but it might surprise you when we're talking about the global cost of ransomware damage is nearly $40,000 every single minute. Now, the interesting thing with between ransomware and business email compromise in particular is business email is the most financially impacting cybercrime of all. Now, you might be thinking, well, actually, the ransomware says it's 40,000. The cost of ransomware is actually due to the damage, the time it takes to actually rebuild the environments, the downtime, all of these things. Potentially, if people have given unto the extortion demands, there may be an element there. But it's business email compromise. It's the one which is really, really high and really important. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight. So I'm going to be talking about the state of cybercrime. When I talk about cybercrime, that's phishing, that's that business email crime, it's ransomware. I'm going to give you some insights when it comes to nation-state actors. I'm going to show you something new that's going on when it comes to cyber influence operations. And then we're going to kind of dovetail into cyber resilience. Now, one of the key things that we're seeing more and more of is this kind of thing called ransomware or cybercrime as a service. Now, what this really means is I do not need to have any IT skills at all. I don't really need a lot of money to be a cyber criminal. I can just go on the dark web. And more services are appearing that enable people to just buy kits, to buy things, to buy credentials, to do these things very, very simply. In actual fact, when we sort of phishing as a service, people can just go and buy a template. I don't even have to design my own phishing email. So if I want to pretend to be Microsoft, if I want to clean up, I might be looking for some Azure or M365, even Xbox credentials. I can just get a template, fill it in, looks exactly what you'd expect Microsoft to look like. It will just take you to a fake site. So we're starting to see more homoglyph domain creations. For those that don't know, that would be like having Microsoft.com, but instead of the instead of the O, it would be a zero. And so they just swap different characters, and they swap them out. So people wouldn't necessarily know just by looking at the domain name if it was real or not. And we're getting more and more people who are offering managed services. So a lot of these actually have help desks. They even have HR sites. You can even make sure you've got finance people to make sure people are getting their right cut, their right commission. And this is the kind of the true reality that we're dealing with. It is this rise in access brokers in particular. Now, I find this stat really quite surprising. So a couple of months ago, I was actually with the National Crime Agency, and what they said is that fraud now makes up 45% of all crime in the UK. Now, a few years ago, that was 25%. And overall fraud, over 80% of all fraud is actually cyber-enabled. So you could kind of say, even in the UK, and we're not even talking about the rest of the globe here, we have an endemic going on in terms of cybercrime and the proceeds of crime in particular. So I want to talk about just how things are evolving. So as the technology gets better, the cyber criminals need to find workarounds. They're the ones on the back foot, if you like. And speed is of the essence. That's really what we're dealing with now. They have to get faster and faster about getting in and getting out, getting access to credentials, getting access to data, whatever they need before you're detected in the network, before you've been able to block them. So one of the things that's really interesting, I want to just talk about these kind of numbers. So you're thinking about still 80% of all attacks still start with some kind of credential compromise. So you'll get an email and it'll have a phishing link or URL in it. What we're finding is a lot of these attachments that are in emails might be a Word document, might be an Excel, and it has a macro in it. So when someone opens the document, it runs a macro, and it does this automatically. It's scripted. It starts opening things in the background. So within 1 hour and 12 minutes is the median time from you launching a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet, or whatever the case may be, running a macro in the background for it to exfiltrate your credentials. What then happens, depending on what they've done, part of that macro might also have a little beacon that goes onto your device, and that's like a phone home, if you like. It's phoning backwards into command and control servers, and it's letting an actual person know that there's now a backdoor that's being provided into that environment, and then they will actually join and try and laterally move into that environment. So sometimes it's pot luck as to what I've got access to, and so I have to keep elevating privilege. I need to kind of see what I've got access to. So an hour and 42 minutes is that mean time to laterally move and trying to get some information out. Now, I talked about business email compromise as being one of the key themes, and you'll notice that 80% of all of those is a law. And that's really building a trusted relationship in your business. So if I'm pretending to be your manager, your manager's manager, and I want to make sure that you're going to start to give me information, I'm going to start intercepting emails, but I'm going to build this relationship with you. So 80% of all business email compromise is just that. It's just to build that relationship. The really big part then is sometimes it's really easy. You can have gift card scams. Sometimes it just be, it's someone's birthday. Can you order me some gift cards and just tell me what the code is on the back? And that might only be 20, 50 quid of gift cards. But you think, I do that multiple times over, and suddenly I've got hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of Amazon vouchers at my disposal. Now I can use them, I can sell them, I can do what else with them. So it's very, very easy again for them to get in and get out. Now I want to talk a little bit about ransomware. So the National Cybersecurity Centre said ransomware is probably one of the most significant cyber threats in the UK right now. But again, it's very much pot luck with regards to what are they doing, how targeted they are. And so really the stat here is they'll start with over 2,500 organisations. And again, it's just what doors can I open, how far can I get with some of these credentials? And then they kind of go down the list. So how quickly are you able to detect me? How easy is it for me to make changes in your environment? How easy is it for me to exfiltrate data, encrypt your network before you've noticed? So sometimes it takes 2,500 organizations for them to hit to get one actual victim. So they need time, they need persistence, and they need patience when it comes to ransomware. Now, I want to give you some insights with regards to nation-state actors. So of all of those trillions of signals that I was talking about, Microsoft is actively tracking about 250 different threat actors. So these are organized crime, these are nation-state actors, and approximately 80 of those are nation-states. Now, again, I'm not expecting you to be able to read all of these slides, but we track the big four, so which is Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Now, one of the things with nation-states in particular, what they used to be known for is stealth. And to get in and get out without nobody noticing. It was all about the espionage, to be as quiet as possible, exfiltrate information, find out what's going on. Since SolarWinds, they have really demonstrated that they don't care if you've detected them. In fact, it's a show of might for me to be so far into your network, so far into your critical infrastructure that you should really kind of be afraid of what I can do and to what extent. Now, it would kind of be remiss of me really not to talk a little bit about Ukraine, and that's really what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at those kind of threat actors under Russia. And I'm going to talk about the hybrid war that we're sort of seeing. And this is a real demonstration. So this is not the first hybrid war. So Russia actually attacked Ukraine back in 2014. And they utilized a lot of these tactics before. So you'll have your kinetic war, your normal physical war, with missiles being fired across land, sea, and air. But the difference with a hybrid war is you also have the cyber attacks, you have psychological warfare, and information warfare. And all of those things combine all at once together. Now, the idea of a hybrid war is if I can cripple the country as quickly as possible, I don't need to waste my ammunition. I don't need to have all of these missiles. I'm trying to cripple the country as quickly as possible to get in and get out. Now, with Russia in particular, I don't think that they really anticipated the level of support that they've had from Western allies, NATO, and other countries, the level of sanctions. So the actual idea of the hybrid war hasn't really worked quite as well. But I'm going to really talk a little bit about the power of the cloud and where we are. So as the Russian troops started to amass on the Ukrainian border, and I'm going back as far as even before Christmas last year, it really dawned on the Ukraine government that a lot of their data was actually on-premise in their own data centers. And this is the same as a lot of public sector organized, a lot of governments. They want to keep their data as close as possible. And so one of the things that Microsoft did was actually we moved 16 out of 17 of their ministries to the cloud. Not only did we move it to the cloud, we moved it out of Ukraine and moved it to several other countries at the same time. And this is really important with regards to where's my data, who's got access to my data, how do I protect that data. And actually the first shots were actually in cyberspace. So people were probably seeing on the news that the tanks started to roll into Ukraine on the 24th of February. But actually the first shots were the 23rd, of the day before. There were 300 simultaneous cyber attacks. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of an insight in terms of some of those Russian actors and what they were doing. So what you'll see here, we've got 7 different intelligence agencies in Russia, and all 7 of them were actually 100% all focused into Ukraine. So whatever they were looking at against other countries, they completely stopped. Now, you will see here is Dev 0586. So when we have a threat actor that we cannot 100% attribute to a known actor or it's a new campaign, we give them this kind of code name. So this could be it's a new campaign, it's a new actor, we're not quite sure. But the interesting thing here, if you look at the top, now Iridium are actually the threat actor behind NotPetya. That kind of caused significant damage about 5 or so years ago. And Russia have really learnt their lessons when it comes to malware, because NotPetya wasn't supposed to escape. It wasn't supposed to get into the wild. And so a lot of the malware that we're actually seeing being utilized against Ukraine, they've had it really confined, and they've made a lot of efforts. Nobelium are actually the threat actor behind SolarWinds. But if you look at the top there, a lot of that focus has been on destruction. And this is really the difference of what we're starting to see. So we're starting to see these malware families that are not only just focused on how much disruption I can cause, but how much destruction. So some of these malware families that you see, some of them, their job is to overwrite and render machines unbootable, particularly like hard drives on endpoints. They delete data. They also encrypt data. So they kind of cause as much damage as possible. The last one is the one that's quite interesting, which is, if you can read, it's In Destroyer 2. And that focuses on the operational technology in particular. So that's why I said it's really important when we're talking about cybersecurity. It's not just IT, it's the IoT and the OT. And I just want to kind of show you, even since the Ukraine war, they started to turn their attention to other countries, potentially as a result of the sanctions. And so they've really been focusing in on sort of North America, Europe, particularly the UK, Nordics, and into Australia. And they've started to move outwards because they're really trying to understand what are the policies of these nations, how far are they going to retaliate, what are they going to do next. And this is kind of where it comes into some of that disinformation. And again, this is a real favorite tactic of Russia. And this is a big area of focus for Microsoft going forward. So this is nothing new from Russia playing their games and some of the things that they do. And again, I'm not expecting you to read this, but in the 1980s, when we had the Cold War, you'll see that... I've just lost my headset. Can you just tuck it back in for me? Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, thanks. Sorry about that. In the 80s, the Russian really were blaming America for AIDS. They said it was an experiment that got out. So these are kind of the tactics that they're utilizing. But one of the things that they utilize, so one of the stories, some of the rhetoric, if you like, that Russia come up with, and it's really their aim is to justify their invasion of Ukraine. And they started as way back as November. And they had this false information regarding to bioweapons. And they did this as far out, and then those disinformation websites went through the roof on the 24th of February in particular. Now, what you're seeing, by the 11th of March, there were 300 websites, all very interesting, targeted at the USA. And this is the kind of the thing that they're targeting different parts of the population. So they're targeting Ukraine people, Russian people, Western allies, and also allies of Russia as well. And so one of the things that Microsoft has been doing in particular is we're trying to look at the true sources of information. So you're seeing a lot of fake information, a lot of doctored information. There's a lot of things being shared on social media, and some of those pictures aren't even from the current war. So it's a real challenge when it comes to media and disinformation, is how do we actually make sure that what is being portrayed is real? So one of the things that we're doing at the moment is we're actually working with The Hague, and we're looking at all of these images. We're collecting as many images as possible. We're using huge amounts of machine learning to catalog all of these images. So at the time when The Hague and others are able to bring some of these people to justice for war crimes, we've got all of the evidence. And this is something that you're going to see more of in terms of when you see these images on social media, we'll be able to tell you what the real actual source of that information is, and we'll be amplifying true sources of legitimate news and data as well. So I want to kind of go into the next area, which is the devices and infrastructure. And I have already talked about some of this already, but we're seeing a huge increase when it comes to governments really focusing in on protection of critical infrastructure. So that's energy, that's transport, financial services, all of those things. And I talked already about the use of malware, and that malware is really infiltrating into critical infrastructure. And we're starting to see the use of malware targeting firmware, malware as a service. But I think the thing that I find very interesting is the level of reconnaissance which the attackers are doing into their operational networks. Now, people think about the operational network and the IT network as being two completely separate environments. The reality for a lot of companies is they actually utilize the IT environment to manage parts of the OT. In particular, when you're thinking about projects or thinking about upgrades, CAD designs, all of those things probably sit in your IT. They might be on SharePoint, you'll be talking to people on email, or maybe people on Teams as well. And so they're infiltrating the IT environment to understand all the projects, all the designs that are going on, so they can learn about the OT. And I think that's important, that they are not separate environments. You may manage them separately, but this is really core to a lot of the things that the attackers are doing and how they're looking to see how I can take advantage, how far I can go into these things. And I want to kind of end with regards to the cyber resilience. Of all these things that we've been talking about, what should we be doing about it? Now, again, I'm not expecting you to read this because it's a lot of information, but in essence, when we look at this type of cyber attacks that have happened with us, ransomware, various different things, there's some commonalities, and some of these really shouldn't kind of be there. Now, I'm going to highlight to you like one of these. So 100% of all organizations that Microsoft has helped from a cyber attack, 100% of those never had privileged access workstations. Now, we're often asked, well, how does Microsoft protect Microsoft? Well, we do not have open-ended access into our production environment. We have just enough and just-in-time access. So if something only takes 5 minutes, you only get 5 minutes, and it's shut down. You cannot pivot from your corporate device, corporate network, your email, off the internet onto the production environment. You actually have completely different devices, completely different credentials. And so that's kind of quite interesting how privileged access manager identity is really core to everything that we're talking about. The second thing I want to talk about is the excessive admin credentials found, just how much access they have. And we see a lot of credentials, a lot of admins that can pivot off the physical environment, the legacy environment, into the cloud and vice versa. And so that's really key. If I'm an attacker and I can get into one of these admins, the world is almost my oyster in terms of what I can do. Kind of the third area that I will just talk about is multi-factor authentication. Now, we will probably die on our sword when we tell you how important MFA is. And kind of just to give you that stat again, of all of the customers that Microsoft have, only 26% actually have MFA enabled. So when we're talking about that scale of password attacks, credential compromises, all of those would have been stopped with some kind of MFA. And we need the MFA on the admins as well. And actually, the foundations are important. So as much as we can talk about the technology and the advances in technology and automation and all of these great things, the foundations really, really work. And I've already told you about MFA. The second point really is the principle of zero trust. Now, zero trust sounds like a bit of a buzzword, but it's actually really simple from a Microsoft perspective. So the first principle is assume compromise. So the best will in the world, the best defense is you have to assume someone's in your network, someone can exfiltrate data out. The second principle is the one I've already talked about, which is the principle of least privilege. And the third principle is the always verifying. So even if someone's on your network, I'm going to continue to verify every transaction, everything that they're doing. Kind of the third area is really about utilizing modern malware, keeping up to date with patching and protecting data. And just to kind of finalize out, I just want to really talk very quickly about some of the key focus areas that Microsoft are really looking at. So identity is really core to everything. It's the root of all trust. And if you're going to start anywhere, it really should be about identity. The threat protection is the ability to go cross-platform, ability to get those deeper insights and apply those insights, and reducing the amount of complexity that you have with multiple tool sets. And then kind of the third area that I'll end on is just the importance of understanding data. What are the attackers after? What are they monetizing? It's the data itself. So we have to be able to correlate behaviors. We need to be able to drive those insights and look at those data. And we need to be dynamic to the actual risk as it applies. So that's thank you. I lost a little bit of time for my headset, but I think I'm literally just on the nose. So thank you very much.
Sarah, thank you.